Joint Standing Committee on the National Broadband Network in relation to its inquiry into the NBN business case and its inquiry into the rollout of the NBN in rural and regional areas. I welcome everyone here today. This is a public hearing and a Hansard transcript of the proceedings is being made. Before the committee starts taking evidence, I remind witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence to a committee. The committee prefers all evidence to be given in public, but under the Senate's resolutions, witnesses have the right to request to be heard in private session. I also remind all committee members that the Senate has resolved that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution prohibits only questions asking for opinions on matters of policy and does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. I ask witnesses to speak clearly and into the microphones to assist Hansard to record proceedings, and I ask people in the hearing room to ensure that their mobile phones are switched to silent. And I now welcome Mr Mike Murdoch and officers from the Department of Communications and the Arts. Information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses and evidence has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, could you each please state your name and the capacity in which you appear?
Thank you, Chair. Mike Murdoch, Secretary of the Department of Communications and the Arts.
Richard Windier, Deputy Secretary, Department of Communications and the Arts.
Nadine Williams, First Assistant Secretary, Infrastructure and Consumer Division.
Andrew Madsen, Assistant Secretary, Broadband Implementation Branch.
The Department has lodged a joint submission with the Department of Finance. This is submission 10 for the Rural and Regional Inquiry and submission 7 for the Business Case Inquiry. Would you like to make any amendments or additions to that submission?
No, Chair.
Mr Murdoch, I invite you therefore to make an opening statement.
I don't have an opening statement, Chair. I'm happy to go to questions by the committee.
We have, I think, members or senators who might have to leave early. Would any of those members or senators like to ask questions? In which case I am here for the duration. I'll hand over to the Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for appearing today. I'll get straight into it. And of course, given what's happening with the bells, if I could ask very politely if you could keep your answers succinct, that would be appreciated. Mr Murdoch, is the government committed to refinancing the $20 billion NBN loan via private debt in 2021?
Yes, Senator, that remains the position as set out in the budget papers. Yes, Senator.
Thank you. Has the department been asked to undertake any preliminary work for selling the NBN?
It remains in our forward work program, but we're yet to do any detailed work on that at this stage.
Okay. Can I ask what is the work in reference to the first one? What is the work that you're looking at doing for the preliminary work?
It remains the government's agenda that at the completion of the rollout of the NBN network, then the various provisions in the legislation would take effect. As you'd be aware, the Act provides a certain number of stages pre the privatisation of the NBN. They include effectively that the completion of the network has been deemed to have taken place. There's a process in that. Secondly, a Productivity Commission inquiry, and thirdly, a review of the service standards of the NBN. Those steps would need to take place. At this stage, the department has not done any detailed work on how that would take place. We remain focused on the completion of the network, and then we'd start the detailed analysis of what those steps would involve.
All right.
Sorry, I apologise, Deputy Chair. Could I just follow up on that one point? You said, Mr Murdoch, you haven't undertaken any detailed work. Have you undertaken work of any kind in this area?
Only very preliminary. I'll check with my officers.
I mean, there's a lot of work that we're doing that no doubt will sort of relate to the reviews when they occur, but we haven't done any work that is specifically related to privatisation.
Would you be able to get back to the committee with a summary of just to double check and give us a summary of any work you have undertaken in relation to this question?
Certainly
just
come
to
back,
be
yeah.
very clear. Thank you.
And if that if that submission could also include, who has requested the preliminary work, the details as Senator Senator Steele-John mentioned.
Certainly. I can confirm we haven't to the extent we haven't engaged or sought any external advisors or assistance associated with preparation for privatisation.
If you haven't engaged any, have you looked at, have you got anybody in mind?
No, we haven't even turned our mind to what might be required in terms of engaging assistance associated with privatisation.
Our work's very focused at this stage on the first criteria, which is the completion of the rollout, and so our work internally this far is really to ascertain the completion date and the status of the rollout.
All right, I'll just quickly come to fixed wireless before handing to another member. To you, Mr Murdoch, was the department advised that NBN had dumped plans to deliver 100 megabits per second services on fixed wireless prior to that being revealed publicly?
I don't believe we were advised before the statement by the CEO of the NBN.
In 2015, NBN Co supplied the department with satellite capital and operational expenditure out to financial year 2021. Can the department provide the cumulative capital expenditure totals for the data that was supplied out to 2021 on notice?
Yes, we'll take that on notice.
Right, appreciate it.
Chair, sorry.
Right, thank you, Chair. Hand over to the member.
Any other colleagues with questions?
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions on the... thank you for your attendance. Sorry about the delays. A couple of questions on the regional broadband levy matter that's before the other place at the moment. Has the department modelled the revenue raised, or expected to be raised, from the RBL out to 2040 under the legislation that's currently before the Senate?
The scheme's designed to recover the forecast loss that has been calculated that we expect NBN to occur out to that period. So in effect, it's calculated to recover the net present value of that $9.8 billion loss and recover that both from NBN and the other service providers in the industry.
Yeah, but is the modelling been done? I understand that the scheme is designed to cover the losses and to account for the losses, but the RBL levy won't entirely cover the losses, is my understanding. But has the revenue from the levy been modelled out to 2040?
Yes, it has.
Right. Okay.
There are projections for revenue in the budget papers, which provide the detailed figures. And then beyond that, it relates to longer-term projections regarding take-up. But as I said, it is over the long term intended to...
It's kind of unusual, is it? There's no other area that I can think of where you would model out to 2040?
The long-term nature of it was to accommodate the very lumpy capital investment that we would expect to see, particularly with replacement of satellite assets. So I think, particularly assets, the satellites themselves have a lifespan of around about 15 years. So trying to model over a shorter space of time, the assumptions around replacement could have a very significant effect. And so hence, when the modelling was undertaken, a long period of time was adopted in order to reflect that and for it not to distort the figures.
Thanks for that. What year has the modelling assumed that the NBN satellites, the Sky Master satellites, will have to be replaced?
I'd have to take that on notice. From memory, it's in the 10 to 15 year sort of period, assumed lifespan for a satellite.
From now or the launch?
From their launch date. But perhaps NBN may be in a better position to give an accurate response to their expected lifespan for the satellites.
And is that assuming the replacement of both satellites or just one of them in the modelling?
Yeah, I think I have to take
They
that on
weren't
notice.
launched at the same time.
No,
So
they were, yeah, I think I'd be better to take that on notice to confirm the values attributed to replacement of the satellite.
okay. And just back to the revenue modelling, how was that project initiated? Was that something the department's done off its own motion, or is there?
So the regional broadband scheme, the concept of requiring a levy has been around for almost since the beginning of the NBN, noting that the NBN commercial business model requires it to cross-subsidise its loss-making services from the revenue generated in profitable areas, and noting that there's a risk that it can lose market share in those profitable areas, which might diminish its ability to maintain that cross-subsidy. The concept of a levy was identified quite early on as potentially being needed to ensure that those loss-making services could continue to be funded. But the specific proposal that is currently before the Parliament originated from the Vertigan Review, which identified that, recommended that government should commence work, and from that, the Department's Bureau of Communications Research initially went about calculating the expected loss that NBN would incur, and then assessed different models for a scheme in order to be able to fund that loss over time.
So that was off your own motion, being proactive?
Yes, yeah.
I'm good with that.
Any further questions? Well, thank you. I'm very happy.
Sorry, yes, I did.
Sorry, Senator Steele. John,
Yeah,
over to
that's
you.
all right. No worries at all. Just a follow-up question regarding the modelling, Mr. Madsen. If the shelf life of these satellites is 15 years, is the department aware of any damage that has been so far sustained to the satellites currently?
No, we're not aware of any issues that would impact the longevity of the satellites or the performance of the satellites.
Because my question would be, if you're modelling out to 2040, is the potential for damage, repairs? I mean, I'm not a satellite specialist here, but is that factored? Do you know if that's factored into the modelling?
Well, I don't think so, Senator. I think what was factored in was what a normal expected, reasonable lifespan for a satellite would be, and I think the history of the communication satellites in play would suggest that is a very rare event to worry about the prospects of damage to it as such. So I think it's just modelled the normal lifespan of a satellite.
I think going back to the beginning, that was part of the rationale about requiring 2 satellites, so that there was service continuity in the event that one of them may be impacted by some sort of event.
All right. Okay. Thanks for that clarification.
Can I just follow up on some of those satellite-related issues? The take-up rate in the satellite footprint is concerningly low, particularly if we're looking at closing the gap between the cost and the revenue generated for them. Has the department initiated any work which would lead to initiatives to close the gap in premises ready for service and those that are actually activated?
Well, we have been we're looking at the take-up rate. I think in terms of where NBN projected it would be at this time, I think I don't have it in front of me, but their corporate plan I think was forecasting around about 100,000 users at this point in.
There are 91,428 at the moment.
Yes.
431,000.
So I think we'd say the take-up rate's slightly lower than had been forecast, but it is still relatively early in the the lifespan of the satellites, and we are looking to see what activity NBN is taking to continue to promote awareness of the satellites, particularly working with regional stakeholders. I think some of the changes that they've made over the course of the last financial year, particularly looking at their fair use policy and the additional data allowances, have resulted in increased the satellites delivering a better range of services, and NBN
But not
is
a pickup in activations.
well. I think that the trend is continuing. The activations are continuing to grow.
So I don't say that they're not. I'm not trying to argue they're not. I'm just saying they're a little anemic. And I'd be is there concern? Let me just put it blunt. Is there a concern about the low rate of activations?
I
in
think
the
we'd
satellite
probably
footprint?
be waiting to see what the NBN says in its corporate plan and projects about the take-up rate over the next year, and whether it estimates that that's going to then come back up to its long-term trajectory.
Look, to be fair to these witnesses,
I think
I'm not
so.
going to hold them
Look,
back.
the committee's suspended for the division, and we'll let the officials go.
We'll do it on
We'll come back to the NBN. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was going to go at 2:15.
Mr Stephen Rue and Mr Peter Ryan from NBN Co. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, we can. Can you hear us?
Oh, amazing technology. First class. Information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses and evidence has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, could you please each state your name and the capacity in which you appear?
Stephen Rue, I'm the Chief Financial Officer of NBN.
And I'm Peter Ryan, the Chief Network Engineering Officer of NBN.
Mr Ryan or Mr Rue, would you like to make an opening statement to the committee?
Thank you, Chair. I do have a very short opening statement, if that's okay. As you just heard, I'm Stephen Rue and I'm here with Peter Ryan, our Chief Network Engineering Officer. Unfortunately, Mr Morrow has been called away at short notice on a family matter and he sends his apologies. You may be aware that our annual results call is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Many of our partners and customers are listed companies and commercial entities, so there's actually little I can say about the results until they're announced through the regular process. But obviously we have made our year-end rollout figures such as activations and ready to connect available as usual on our website. The corporate plan itself is also scheduled to be released by the end of August, once approved by our shareholders. And we look forward to discussing this with you once the plan is public. Now, I know this committee has been advocating for people in rural and regional areas, and it's great that there has been a focus, that this has been a focus of your inquiry. And I know you're particularly interested in the fixed wireless network, so let me update you briefly on our progress with that. You would know that we've been consulting with industry on the fixed wireless network, which is of course a finite resource because it relies on available spectrum. And as with any technology, we are continually assessing demand and capacity on the network so we can help people get a consistent experience. We want to reassure you and the public that we are continuing to upgrade capacity on the network, prioritising those areas where people are experiencing or at risk of experiencing congestion. To date, more than 3,100 cells across the NBN fixed wireless network have had capacity upgrades complete. And of these, more than 2,200 were completed so far this calendar year, with a similar number scheduled by the end of this year. And we continue to examine options to help manage demand on the network, but we will consult with industry before adopting any new initiatives. So following industry consultation, which is now complete, NBN will launch new fixed wireless discount bundles on Monday the 20th of August to internet providers. We'll listen to feedback throughout the consultation and have kept the bundle price of the 50 megabits per second product at $45 for existing users. These new wholesale bundle discounts will provide RSPs with added flexibility and choice to package and price their retail plan for homes and businesses. Similar to NBN's fixed line pricing, the fixed wireless bundle discounts will include access and an associated amount of bandwidth for a single effective discounted charge for internet providers. We will also be consulting with internet providers over coming months on new product ideas to better reflect user demand for its wireless network. And we'll continue to work with industry to deliver a consistent fixed wireless service into the future. So thank you, and with that, we'll look forward to answering any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr Rue. Mr Ryan, did you want to add anything?
No, nothing, thank you.
In which case, I'll kick off with a couple of questions. Thank you for the update on new pricing for the RSP bundled products. What research did you do to demonstrate that customers would be satisfied and you're responding to customer needs as opposed to RSP needs?
Yeah, I mean, we look at we obviously consult with the industry. We do gain feedback in research from end users as well, and we know that the end users are looking for capacity on the network. We know that there is ever-changing consumer needs. In fact, since the fixed wireless was originally came about, 8 years ago now, the the experience of users has changed over time. It's changed because of increasing usage of video streaming. It's changed because of increased concurrency at busy hour, for example. So we know that there are needs of end users that we need to address, and we're, as I said in my statement, we have ongoing consultation with the industry around this.
Thank you. I'll ask a couple of questions now about satellite, which is quite close to my heart, but obviously relevant to this committee's rural and regional inquiry. And I certainly sense some frustration in previous submissions with consumers, end users, believing that the satellite system was congested, where in fact it's not congested at all. And this low take-up is a bit of a chicken and egg situation in some respects, people believing that we're not going to take it up because we don't think it's any good, because we've heard it's no good, even though we might have heard about the previous satellite, not the current one. We had quite a bit of evidence about that. What steps are you taking to improve the take-up of Sky Muster services?
Well, at the end of the day, we have a team which we call NBN Local, which is in the which travels around the country and talks to end users. We have some trucks, for example, that we bring around and demonstrate the satellite service. And clearly, for the RSPs are aware of the product, and thank you for your comments. They're aware of the fact that end users on the satellite service actually are very happy with the service they receive. But obviously, the RSPs themselves have every reason to market the product to their end users as well. But from us, as I said, we have a group of people that travel around the country continually talk about the needs of regional and rural Australia, and indeed the capability of the NBN satellite service.
Thank you. And there was also some feedback about the communication to end users about outages, and again, a bit of a ping pong between NBN Co and the satellite provider. I certainly felt that if that communication was better, we would avoid some of the frustrations and disappointment. Have you put in place any better communication channels to communicate about the outages via the RSPs, I guess, on the satellite?
Yeah, so all the outages that we experience on Sky Muster, we communicate to our RSPs via a portal, and they're available then to communicate onto their own customers. Overall, we're seeing the service is very certainly we're quite comfortable with its level of performance.
Thank you. And just one question about fixed wireless network. We heard from Aussie Broadband commenting on the timelines for the upgrades to the fixed wireless network, that they were promised to be delivered by the end of December, but the work's still going, now promised by August, which is obviously after we heard from Aussie Broadband, who did say they were sceptical it would be completed. Can you give us an update about how those upgrades to the fixed wireless network are going and what is causing the ongoing delay?
Yeah, well, while Mr. Ryan looks at the information, as I said in my opening statement, we're actually working very hard on this and have made significant progress. It's something, though, that Mr. Ryan looks at on a very regular basis, I assure you. Want to give some detail?
Yeah, so when the decision was made the back half of last year to raise the threshold for deploying capacity to sites from 3 megabits to 6 megabits, we knew at that time that the typical cycle time to deploy that capacity upgrade could be anywhere from 12 to 18 months, and that's because we have to put new dishes on towers, which often requires planning approvals as well as landlord approvals, as well as, if it's not our tower, which is the case in I think around 25% of the occasions, we have to go back to that owner and often have to strengthen them. So we always knew that it would take somewhere from towards the end of this year to early into the following year to be able to complete. We are seeing the rate at which we're deploying capacity upgrades is increasing all the time. certainly completing it by the end of December last year was I don't know where that's come from, because we can never do it that fast.
Yeah.
So we're certainly targeting the middle of next year to get that back down to acceptable thresholds, and we're seeing that drop all the time. So as I said, we're working very hard. We've got a lot of focus on it. We're seeing the volume of capacity upgrades is going up all the time, and we are seeing a gradual drop in the number of congested cells in the network.
How are you prioritising which fixed wireless towers are upgraded first?
We certainly focus on the most congested, and we prioritise those. And as we get on top of those, we start to work on towers that become congested, because we can often forecast based on usage and take up the rate at which cells may become congested. So then we focus on those second. But we absolutely focus on the most congested cells in the network.
Thank you. Over to you, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for attending. Seems we're running a bit behind time. I'll try and keep my questions short, and if you wouldn't mind keeping your answers succinct, because we're having division bells today, that would be much appreciated. Just coming to the fixed wireless towers network, Mr. Rue, is NBN Co spending more and investing more into fixed wireless today than it expected to back in 2015?
Certainly the capacity program that we are working on is something that is an incremental investment into the network. Yes.
Sorry, if I can just get a bit of clarity on that. So, are you essentially spending more on fixed wireless today than you expected to 3 years ago?
To some extent, yes, we are. I think it would be fair to say that the investment we're making today would be a little bit higher than what we had in 2015. If you're referring to the 2015 corporate plan, yes.
Can I ask to what extent you're spending more in dollar terms?
I don't have that comparison with me. I'm sorry. I apologise. I don't have that today. So let me take that on notice, if I could, please.
That would be appreciated. To Mr. Rue, when did NBN Co, or even Mr. Ryan may be able to answer this as well, when did NBN Co first decide to abandon the promised 100 megabits per second upgrade path on fixed wireless? So what year and what month, if you don't mind, as well?
I'm sorry, I'll have to take that on notice. I do recall a discussion which I was in with Mr. Morrow and the department, I believe, on that, but I'm not exactly sure what month that was. So let me take that on notice.
Would Mr. Ryan have been involved?
What I think would be helpful if I get you the exact train of events and the discussions.
Thank you. Did NBN Co advise the Minister and the Minister for Regional Communications that it had dumped the plan prior to being revealed in Senate estimates? On what date, and was it in writing?
Again, I'll have to take that on notice. My memory was certainly a discussion with the department in a meeting I was with Mr. Morrow in. The exact date, it would have, but the exact date of that I'll have to take on notice. I'm sorry, or I will try and get it to you before the end of the hearing. But I'll do my best. But if not, we'll certainly take the question and answer you later.
All right, I've got another related question, which I imagine will have a similar answer. When did NBN advise the department? And can you please provide that date? So if I could lump that in with those other answers, that'd be appreciated.
Yeah, what we might do is try and lump all those questions together and give you an answer in one hit.
All right. If I could ask, though, that if they could be specifically answered rather than just some sort of general, that'd be appreciated.
Of course. Yes, certainly.
On 24 May this year, under questioning by Labor senators, the NBN CEO, Mr. Morrow, revealed that the company had dumped its promised plans to deliver the 100 megabits per second upgrade. When was the department first advised that NBN Co had dumped that promise to deliver the upgrade?
I'm not sure that the word dump the promise, but certainly I'm sorry, I'll have to take that on notice, and I'll answer that in conjunction with the other questions as well you've asked.
Okay. The 2018 NBN corporate plan states, and I quote, NBN plans to boost the wholesale speeds available on its fixed wireless network up to 100 down and 40 up, due for launch in 2018. The speed boost should be achievable through implementation of new carrier aggregation technology following successful trials. The technology should increase the bandwidth and capacity of the NBN fixed wireless network and does not require substantial new infrastructure deployment. This is another example of NBN's flexibility to introduce technology advancements to provide a network of the future. Can I ask what happened between 2017 and April 2018? How did that statement unravel so quickly? NBN Co knew what traffic trends there would have been. After all, Netflix was not invented at Christmas. What changed?
Yeah, certainly. Certainly when we made those statements, they were statements that we believed and we intended at the time. As we went to actually continue to develop the product, but also as we saw with the increased take-up of end users on the fixed wireless network, the changes to concurrency, the changes to, in fact, their behaviour, meant that the decision, as Mr. Morrow outlined in the hearing, was made that product should no longer, at this point in time, be released. So it was no more than more information came, and as we looked at the viability of that product, and as we looked at the program that Mr. Ryan has outlined a few minutes earlier, we thought it was sensible to not launch that product.
Are you saying you were surprised by the changes that occurred, or you were surprised by the take-up?
I think as we learned more through the year, and as we looked at the mechanics of what was going to be required for both the launch of that product and the impact upon other users who would be on shared cells, that a decision was made for the good of everybody, that it was not sensible to launch that product.
Did the commitment require NBN to increase its capital expenditure profile for fixed wireless relative to its plans prior to that commitment?
If we were to maintain a user experience for existing customers on the fixed wireless network, it would have required, it would have required us to spend much more capital on the fixed wireless network. It's related to the experience of existing users.
So how much more capital would have been required?
Senator, a lot of money. Again, I don't have that analysis in front of me, but it would have been a lot of money.
Do you have the analysis?
Hundreds of millions of dollars we're talking about.
So you do have the analysis. Can I ask that be provided to the committee?
We have a high level analysis. Well, let me take that again. Let me take that question on notice, and I'm very happy to provide that on notice to you.
Deputy Chair, could I just get a bit more clarification on that one? I mean, excuse me, Mr. Rue.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry, it's Senator Steele John here. Is that better?
Hello, how are you?
Yep, good. Just wanted to bring you to a bit more clarity on that. Surely you kind of written it off unless you had a reasonable idea of how much it would cost. I mean, you must have. You said you had some very high-level idea, but how did you come to the conclusion it would be too costly without a more detailed analysis?
I'm sorry, I interrupted halfway through. I apologise. The reason, simply, as we looked at the growing concurrency on the network and as we looked at the customer experience, it became obvious that we would have to. We didn't have to go into an area costing by costing to know that it was going to be a very, very significant spend if we were to continue launching that product. So our decision was made not to. To do a area by area would have been unnecessary to do the absolute detail analysis.
But how do you define a very, very expensive. I mean, this is a very, very expensive project. You know, like what are we talking here?
Because the incremental spend that Mr. Ryan would have to incur in the network. Do you want to add anything to this conversation?
No, I think it is, as you say, when it was investigated and the cost was considered and the feasibility to deploy the product, it was decided that it wasn't in the best interest.
I'm really going to have to ask, gentlemen, about the feasibility and the costs you're talking about. Obviously, costs are relative with a multi-billion-dollar rollout. Talking about a high cost, I've got no real idea of what the relative costs are you're talking about. If you could provide some information to the committee on notice about the, how much in dollar terms this would have cost, then I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, no, certainly. But if I could just emphasise that we are focused on congestion and we're focused on customer experience, and that's our clear focus, rather than necessarily launching another product. So I think I certainly do the costings. I'll answer the questions on the costings on notice, but I just want the committee to understand that this is all about customer experience of people on the existing network and managing the congestion. I think that is something that we rightly should focus on, rather than launching another product that would even worse.
We lost your audio for a second there, but I'll just come to the point that Mr. Morrow did say in September 17, there was a bit of fanfare about the new product, and I would have imagined all those things would have been taken into account, and then suddenly it was dropped. So we're just trying to. I mean, you're saying that the reason you dropped it was because the take up on the towers, and you realised that other customers will be congested. But we'd like to get the facts and the reports and the figures that you were relying upon to make those decisions.
Sure, there's three things: the take up, the congestion, but also the concurrency, and those three things was leading to an issue that we needed to address more, which was the ongoing congestion, and this product would have meant that Mr. Ryan would have to incur even more capital to address the issue for other users.
Last one from me, and then we'll move on to other members and senators. The 2018 corporate plan states, as at June 2017, the cost per premises for fixed wireless was $3,569. The weighted average CPP is forecast to increase to $4,300 due to challenging build requirements as NBN progresses further into the construction phase of the rollout. This has reduced from the Corporate Plan 2017 cost per premise due to initiatives that have increased on average the number of premises covered by each tower. What were these initiatives to increase the number of premises covered by each tower? Is it saying that NBN has loaded more subscribers onto its towers? What else could it be saying?
Yeah. Do you want to explain the expansion of the network?
So this is where we've increased the catchment of So this is where when we turn a site on, we have predetermined what the signal strength needs to be at the house in order for it to receive an acceptable service from that tower. So we made all our analysis based on a predetermined signal strength. When we got out in the field, what we realised over time was that houses were able to receiving a slightly weaker signal were still able to get an acceptable service. And what that allowed us to do was to capture more houses under the same antenna footprint than what we had originally intended through our theoretical analysis. So, in the end, it was actually a good outcome, because without having to deploy more capital, build more towers, etc., we were able to pick up more premises under that tower and still deliver the grade of service for that fixed wireless product that we intended, simply by then changing our theoretical signal strength, which actually increases the footprint of the capture of that cell.
hasn't resulted in a decrease in the quality of service for the users that were on that tower previously?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's part of our connection process that we have to. Part of our connection process is that we have to verify the grade of service at the point of connection, so we don't walk away until we're absolutely sure.
What speeds, if I could just follow up on that, so Stephen Jones here, Mr. Ryan, what speeds were you using as your internal metric to say that is an acceptable speed for that premises?
Well, it's more driven by the RF signal strength that is being received at that location. So all our testing is based on that RF signal speed, and we know that RF signal speed can then offer whatever product that customer seeks to purchase. So if it's a 50/20 product, for example, at that signal strength, then that customer will get an acceptable grade of service regardless of whatever product they've purchased from the RSP.
But you won't know at that point in time?
Which is why we make sure that the signal strength is capable of delivering whatever the maximum product available to buy under the fixed wireless product construct.
So that would have been a 50 meg product?
A 50 meg product at that point.
So each of those houses, your internal rate, your internal metric would have been a signal sufficient to deliver a 50 meg product?
Correct, yes.
Well, why are we now having the 5 meg as the baseline for a tower upgrade?
The whole premise of the fixed wireless has all been about a peak rate.
Can I just say it's 6 meg, by the way? Just
6 megs, I apologise. I've got two senators here who are going to listen attentively to your answer. I've got to go
That's
make a division.
You've got to go and vote. Okay.
So I'll talk, if that's okay.
We have
Yeah, just let's keep rolling.
Do we continue, Chair?
Shall we continue?
Yes, please.
Yep. Okay, so the fixed wireless is based on a peak committed rate rather than a committed rate, so a minimum. So
I missed what you said. It's on a...
Yeah, the service is based on a peak peak rate, not a minimum rate. So we design the network up to, and we offer services up to that 50/20 layer 2 wholesale, but over time, based on the take-up rate within that site, plus the usage patterns of those customers, either in terms of the volume of traffic that they generate or the concurrency or time of day that they use it, there will be a contention for the limited amount of radio resources and spectrum resources, which means at peak times, certainly in busy hours, you'll see that on more congested cells, that speed will come down. We have our current plan is that we are seeking to ensure that the average speed on any cell never falls below 6, and that's that capacity deployment program we talked about earlier, which we're rolling out at the moment.
Okay. Thank you. Seeing as some of our colleagues have just had to move on for a little while, could I go to some questions around the HFC rollout? And we may return to the matters that were under discussion. So, unless you had questions?
I did, but
about the same matter?
I did, yeah.
Sorry, I'll withdraw that and hand over to Senator Steele-John for his questions.
All right.
On is it the fixed wireless tower?
No, another issue around HFC. Thanks, Senator O'Neill. I appreciate it. Mr. Ryan, I'll draw your attention to figures released as part of the ACCC's Wholesale Market Indicators Report, which shows that although NBN Co. has put around, since April, lifted the freeze, obviously, and put out another 39 premises released for sale, only 1,200, according to the report, have been able to sign up and get active connection as of the end of June. First of all, does this figure cause either of you concern?
Let me, I'll answer that question, Senator. Let me just confirm the numbers as well, though, if that's okay. But no, it doesn't, actually. The HSC programme and the work that's been done on the network, I'll let Mr. Ryan talk to, as he would be a lot more eloquent than I would be on it. But we made a deliberate choice to release the HFC product back to the market on.
You are the only participant.
Looks like it's been leased out.
HFC. Jesus, you couldn't make it up.
So I think in the absence of a stable internet connection to the NBN,
The NBN
we might need
might
to
have to suspend.
briefly.
We may have to suspend.
So the committee is suspended until a line can be restored.
I can't hear you.
Can you hear us?
I can hear you now.
Thank you.
I can hear you now.
Yes, thank you. Now we're back live again. Do you want to continue your answer?
Yeah, I apologise for that. I don't know what happened, actually. We just had to actually look, and since 30 June, we have released another 92,000 premises into the market.
Well, if I could just correct that,
Yep.
since we've started to re-release,
It's 92,000.
which was started back in whenever it was.
So we've now re-released 92,000 new premises, and we've got an additional 8,000 customers this year. In other words, since 30 June, right?
That's right.
Since 30 June, we've another 8,000 customers. No, what I was saying, and I'm not sure how much you heard, so if I'm repeating myself, I'm sorry, but we took the decision to effectively treat the HFC when we released the product back to the market. We chose to treat it as a product relaunch. So we worked carefully with through our processes and through our retail partners' processes. We made sure that the service delivery partners who will be doing the connections for us, that they had their processes in place. We wanted to make sure that the experience of the customers coming onto the network was what you would expect. So rather than rush through a relaunch of the product, we took deliberately a sensible approach to relaunching the product. So actually, Senator, to answer your question, at all, it was a deliberate choice. You will see in coming months an acceleration of footprint released back in the market, and we're very confident that the retailers will have great confidence in selling the product.
But Mr. Rue, wouldn't that suggest the situation is in fact worse? So you're saying to me 92,000 released since the end of June, but still only 1,200 able to get an active connection via HFC?
No, we've actually added 8,000 customers since. But don't forget, Senator, that there is always a gradual uptake of customers.
Yeah, but 8,000 since the beginning of the year.
When you launch an area for
8,000 new customers via HFC since the beginning of the year, yeah. But only 1,200 of those.
Sorry, can I correct that? It's since we relaunched. I'm sorry. I apologise. It is since the relaunch. We've an additional 8,000 customers. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, that would make more sense.
Confusing you.
That's all right. That's all right. And can I just press you? And I know we've been down this track before, but could you provide the committee with some clarity as to what you expect to be the total financial impact of the HFC freeze upon the NBN Co's bottom line?
Yes, Senator, I apologise because I always give you the same answer to this, but eventually we'll be there. We are releasing our corporate plan, as I said in my opening statement. It is still to be approved by shareholders, but we anticipate releasing that plan at the end of this month. At that time, I will commit to giving you a wholesome answer on that question that I know you've asked me now twice, I believe.
I have, Mr. Rue, and I'd really like to know what has accounted for your inability to answer that question at this point in time, given the time that's elapsed since I last asked you that question.
Yeah, no, Senator, I understand your frustration. The planning process is very detailed. It's something we're very proud of between the strategy team, the finance team, but the whole of the company. We build a bottom-up plan that goes out multi-years. When I say we build it up, it's built up right from the people on the ground, and that requires, and for example, in this case, an area-by-area review of build program, the what we call a serviceability program, what we call the work that Mr. Ryan's been doing on the network as well, and we once we've built up an area by area, we then look at when we would release that footprint for sale. We then look at the activations of that footprint. In other words, how many customers come on, and that of course drives the financials, and that's part of we look at the technologies we choose, for example, in areas as well, and that's a very long and detailed process. When that's built up, naturally that forms the basis of the corporate plan, which then requires approval by our board and then approval by shareholders, or needs to be lodged with shareholders. So we're in the latter part of that process, and I hope that's why it takes so long. And I hope we will be talking about our corporate plan in coming weeks, and it will all become. We'll be able to talk to you about it, Senator, at that point.
So, Mr. Rue, can I just indicate, an ongoing concern about this pattern, where the timing of the report for the organisation is more important than the accuracy and openness of communication with the Senate, who's overseeing it for the country. Given that you've just indicated that it will be an end-of-month release, what date do you expect to release the corporate plan? I'm sure there's some work already underway.
We're hoping to release towards the end of the month. The date's still to be firmed up, but what I should point out is that as a GBE, we're required to release a corporate plan at the end of August. So it's not an unusual time frame, Senator. And I think when you look at our corporate plan...
No, but given the nature of the work that you've undertaken and how close you must be to pushing the button on print, I would think that there would be sufficient information for you to come and share it with the committee. Available to you today?
The corporate plan is not yet at a stage where we have approval to release, Senator, so I'm sorry, I cannot talk about it.
What is the timetable from where we are today in terms of the steps that need to be completed? What are the next steps, and when does that occur?
We need to have one more final approval from our board, and we need to have approval from our shareholder departments to release the corporate plan, which, as I stated, we hope to do within the next 2 weeks, if 2 weeks is the end of the month.
Does the board meet formally to approve the plan in person, or what's the process there?
The board has regular meetings in person, and it would be one of many items on the agenda.
And that will happen in the dates between the 15th and the end of the month?
Yes, it will.
You don't know what date?
The board meeting is sometime next week, I believe.
Okay, so can you give me a date?
I believe it's Tuesday.
Okay, and the tick off by the shareholders, shareholder ministers, when do you expect to have that?
That's not in my control, so I can't answer that question, I'm sorry, but I would hope to have that sometime between now and the end of the month. I'm sorry, I can't. I don't know.
You can take that on notice. That'd be good, Mr. Rue.
Yeah, I
did you
can,
want to finish?
although I think, sorry, Senator, I think my answer would be, though, I think my answer will simply be that's a matter for government, but it's not a matter for NBN, I'm sorry.
Thank you. So Chair, while you were gone, Senator Steele-John was just asking a few questions. I think he's only got a couple to finish, and then
Yes.
we left yours to return to. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
They are on a different topic though. So if you'd like to circle
Go back to the line of questioning.
Yeah. I'm fine for you to continue if you want to.
I think we were talking about wireless before I was interrupted by democracy. I want to go back to that issue of additional houses being loaded on a sector. I find it hard to get my head around this. It just doesn't seem right that you can load more and more houses onto a sector in a wireless cell, and that's not going to degrade the signal that's available to the houses. I mean, the evidence that you guys have given to us in the past is that the more users downloading more stuff, you've got a contended service. It's basic laws of physics. How can it be if you are putting more users in a sector, it's not going to impact on the signal?
Well, it won't impact on the signal, but what it will do is it'll put more load on the cell, which, if we don't manage our capacity well, will over time put the cell into a level of congestion.
And has?
In some instances, yes.
Okay. So it hasn't had an impact, and that's what the upgrade program's about, I presume?
It's got very little to do with the additional houses. It's got much more to do with the take-up rates, the usage patterns of customers within the cell.
I'm glad you're right. I just want to go back to a matter. On the 6th of June, Mr. Morrow was giving evidence. You were there yourself, Mr. Rue, and we were talking about this issue of congestion, of super users. I asked the NBN witnesses to provide some information on what the super users look like. I asked the NBN whether we knew who they were, whether it was video content, streaming content, data downloads. Mr. Morrow said, and I quote, "We believe it's gamers predominantly." I asked the NBN to provide the committee with data which would back up this proposition. When I received responses to the questions on notice, no data was provided. In fact, an answer was given that in no way correlates to that question. So can I put the question to you again? Do you still maintain that it's gamers that are predominantly the problem with congestion in the wireless network?
I think, Mr. Jones, that because Mr. Morrow isn't here, I'll talk on his behalf. I think he was simply trying to provide an example, and I don't think he was in any way trying to blame one section of the community for... I didn't use the word blame.
I just said his words were precisely, it's predominantly gamers.
Well, I think he was... I think what he was trying to do was to provide an example, and he wasn't trying to say that, if you don't use the word blame, he wasn't trying to say that there was one specific part of the community. All he was simply saying is that high-end users, that the high-capacity users, and there is a certain percentage of those. You can understand it's a I was going to say a bell curve, but you know what I mean. It's a curve that at the end has got a few people that use a lot of capacity. He was simply trying to point out that there are a small number of users who use a lot of capacity. That's simply what he was trying to do. Trying to say.
Do you have any data which enables us to understand the proposition that you have just put to? Because on the 6th of June I asked you to provide some data. You said you would, and you haven't. In fact, you've just given an answer that doesn't correlate to the question that was asked. So I'll put it again, leave the gamers issues out. Do you have data which enables us to validate that proposition?
Sorry, I simply wanted to put on the record that Mr. Morrow was not blaming gamers for congestion. That's simply what I was trying to say. So, let me ask some colleagues who are listening in and see if we've got something for you, Mr. Jones. I don't have anything here. I'm sorry, unless you have, Mr. Ryan.
No.
Yeah. So let us press the button and see what comes back.
Well,
if not, we'll take that on notice again otherwise.
Thank you. I'll stay on the issue of wireless for a moment. During that same hearing that I'm referring to, and in subsequent public statements, NBN has said that we are looking at a range of options to manage, to groom, and to otherwise deal with congestion in the wireless network. Subsequently, we have had, or some of us have had, representations from retail service providers saying that in pricing discussions with the NBN, it is proposed that there will be a differential pricing arrangement for wireless customers on the NBN as compared to fixed line customers on the NBN. Can the NBN rule out that customers who are accessing a standard service on a wireless network will be charged more than a person who is receiving that same service on a fixed line network?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So our legacy products on fixed wireless is obviously equal to what we call legacy. I'm sorry. What I mean is those that aren't on a bundle. It's the same construct as a fixed line construct. We did, and I mentioned this in the opening statement, Mr. Jones, but we did consult with the industry over having over $65 bundle 50/20 service with 2 megabits per second inclusion. Having listened to the industry, we have, I'll tell you now in advance, we've decided to say to the industry that for existing users of 50/20 service, we will charge $45 for that service, which equates to the service on a fixed line.
But you cannot rule out that for new customers on a 50/20 service, they will be charged more for the equivalent service as a fixed line user.
Yeah, so the intention is for any new customers who choose the bundle service, and remember they can still have the what I deem the legacy, but what I mean is the AVC CVC construct. We have decided for new customers that will remain at $65, but I don't think that is forever. We continue to discuss with the industry around appropriate products to launch into the market, appropriate price points, products that deal with the issues we've been talking about today around concurrency. And look, it would be too early for me to preempt what those products may be, but we're very conscious of the fact that we need to provide a service to people on the fixed wireless network that meets their needs.
What I'm understanding from what you've said to me is that it is anticipated by the NBN that there will be a differential price for an equivalent service for people on the wireless service as opposed to the fixed line service, and that will be more.
If a new person chooses, through a retailer, if the retailer chooses to put a new customer onto a 50/20 bundle service, that would be at $65, and that in part equates for the increment. That in part is due to the incremental cost, of course, that is incurred if people use a 50/20 service to the full extent. But what I will say, Mr. Jones, is that is something that we're aware of, and it's something that we will continue to work with the industry around future product constructs.
Well, I'm sure you don't need me to state the obvious that customers who have had no choice over what sort of technology they get their NBN service from are not going to be happy about the fact that they are being charged more for an equivalent level of service than those who are receiving a fixed line service, particularly when you throw in the contention issues that we have been discussing earlier this afternoon.
So what we're very, it's a little bit like what I was talking about earlier in 100, very conscious of the customer experience for everybody. And where you have shared capacity, we've got to manage that shared capacity as best we can. And we're conscious of that fact, and we know we need to provide, in consultation with the industry, we need to provide the best customer experience to the most amount of fixed wireless users.
Can I take from what you're saying that you're going to use price as a means of choking demand for the 50 meg service?
What I'm saying is that we're in a process of working with industry as consumer behaviour continues to evolve and consumer needs continue to evolve, we too need to evolve our products. And I think that you should take this as something that's interim as we work towards a model that works best for the economics and for the needs of the end users and the industry, in fact.
But I just want to be quite clear, from what you've just said to me, a new customer on a wireless network will be charged $65 for a wholesale price for a 50 megabits per second service compared to the $45 equivalent if you're in the city on a fixed line service.
So can I just slightly correct that? That is for a bundle service. The RSP can still buy the 50/20, what I called, legacy product, which is the $34 AVC and a CVC charge depending upon the capacity used.
Can I go to the pricing structures, and I'm not just talking about the wireless network now. My understanding is the interim, the pricing agreement, the discount expires in October, am I right?
Yeah, that's correct, yes.
Yeah. What happens to pricing for the 12 and 25 megabits per second? Sorry, just for Hansard's record, you're a bit inaudible there. It's correct that the pricing arrangement expires in October this year?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. For the benefit of Hansard, I wanted to make sure that was what I heard. What happens to the 12 and 25 megabits per second plans which are not part of the new bundling pricing? What does the CVC price revert to for them?
There is ongoing dimension-based pricing, and that will continue in place.
So that is what you're referring to as the heritage pricing?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Can I move to, unless any of my, want to go to some other issues, but if other colleagues have got a question on pricing, we may as well stay on a theme.
I very quickly wanted to confirm what you were saying, Mr. Jones. Mr. Rue, Mr. Ryan, I represent a country electorate with a lot of my people are on fixed wireless. I want to be crystal clear. Are you saying that if somebody lives in the centre of Hobart and they're on a 50 service, a bundled service, they're paying 45 wholesale. If they move out to my electorate and get a fixed wireless tower on the new bundled service you're talking about, they'll be paying 65 wholesale. Is that the essence of what you're saying?
I'm not sure I understand the Hobart too, but
sorry,
sorry, I do understand. You mean if you move from the city to region? I'm sorry. Well, if the RSP chooses to sell them a bundled product. If the RSP chooses, to purchase a bundled product from us at a 50/20 product, that will be $65, yes. What the RSP then chooses to on-charge to the end user is a matter that I can't comment on.
What is the bundled product for fixed line that you sell to the RSPs?
So we will be selling a 50/20 bundled product for $45, which includes 2 megabits per second inclusion, and a 140 product with 2.5 megabits per second inclusion.
So it confirms what Mr. Jones has been saying, that if somebody in the city on a fixed line service is getting it for $45, if they move into the country on fixed wireless, then they're paying 65 wholesale. So it's a price differential.
To be clear, we're talking wholesale prices here, not retail prices.
I know, but thank you.
I'd like to pick up on that if I can, please, because in the area I live, we have a mix of fixed wireless and fibre to the node and fibre to the curb out in the outer peri-urban areas of Sydney. So you're clarifying that neighbours side by side will be paying significantly different bundled prices, and that there won't be any smoothing of prices so that within a single region there's a single sort of packaged price?
No, I'm not. I'm talking about wholesale prices. Yeah, I'm not talking about retail prices.
So would you expect retailers? Would you expect retailers to do any smoothing of prices so that somebody in, for instance, Pitt Town, no matter what type of service they're on, has a similar priced product, or would that be beyond your expectation?
I can't comment on what retailers will do, but if I could just clarify that we're very in a fixed wireless product, you're dealing with shared capacity, and because of that, you have to deal with the customer experience of people on that shared network. And what we need to do, therefore, is work with our industry colleagues to ensure that we come up with the best products that provides the best customer experience for those end users. And this pricing construct that we're talking about now, firstly, is only for new end users. We consulted with the industry. The price for existing customers, wholesale price of $45. So on top of that, this is not something that you should consider, the committee should consider as the final answer. We need to continue to discuss with the industry, and we will do that, and we'll address, as part of that, we are attempting to address the very concerns that you're raising today.
Thank you.
I've got some other questions on other things, but if other colleagues have got
Georgia,
pricing.
did you have any questions? Okay, back to you then, Mr Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I want to talk about Project Fusion, which, as I understand, is the internal name given to the project that you're working on around Service Class 0 premises. Perhaps, Mr Ryan, if you could just confirm that my understanding on that.
I'm not 100% sure of the project name, but I am aware that we've got a real focus on serviceability, which is all about what you're referring to.
My understanding is there's around about 70,000 premises within the copper footprint that are classified as Service Class 0. Can you, for the benefit of the committee, give an outline of the sorts of classifications or issues, categories of issues that result in a fibre to the node connection being classified as Service Class 0?
Typically, it's what we refer to as a long copper line. In other words, if the distance from the node to the house, as measured down the piece of copper, exceeds a certain length, and that length, is generally just over a kilometre, then if we know that...
Just over a what? You broke up a little bit, I'm sorry. A kilometre.
Just over a kilometre, yeah.
Thank you, Mr Ryan.
We know that if the copper length is just over a kilometre, it will not deliver the minimum of a 25 meg service, and therefore what we do is, rather than hold back the whole SAM, we release the whole SAM ready for service, and we declare those premises with long copper lines as being Service Class 10 or 0. And we then go through a process which drops into a program of work which then seeks to deploy a solution that enables those premises to achieve the minimum.
If I could just interrupt. My understanding, Service Class 10 has a copper line but no service, but cannot meet the minimum standards. Service Class 0 has no line in. Is that correct?
No. They go 10, they go 0, 10, 20 or 30 based on the technology. So in fibre to the premise, an unserviceable premise is a 0. In fibre to the node or copper, it's a 10. In HFC, it's a 20, and yeah, there you go.
Thank you for clarifying that. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, so the reason why we have 10s predominantly is long copper lines, i.e. the distance to the house. So we don't, so that 98% of the premises can obtain access to the NBN order of service. We release the footprint ready for service, but we identify those premises with long copper lines and we declare them as a service class 10, which means you can't order a service. And then we work busily to deploy a solution that allows us to make those premises serviceable.
And what sort of solutions are you working on for those service class 10? You've set up a project to deal with it. So
at the moment, typically what we have to do is deploy fibre deeper into the network. So we'll run fibre from the node out towards these premises and stand up what we call a micro node, which is just a piece of electronics that can handle around about 40 premises. 40 to 60 premises, and then that shortens the copper length up such that we're able to deliver the minimum of a 25.5 service.
My understanding is that in respect of speeds within and your own internal rules within the copper network, unless a speed drops below 12 megabits per second, you don't take proactive steps to go out and remediate that line. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. We have an internal process that is constantly looking at services that will not meet the minimum of a 25.5 post coexistence. So this is after we remove all the existing ADSL lines off the pillar. And what we then do is we then try and identify why aren't they delivering those speeds. What we then do people to fix the problem that allows that to be achieved. What we've also done with our retail service providers is that if they have customers that raise a speed issue as a service assurance fault, we then run a test on that. If we can identify that problem is due to our network versus an in-home wiring issue, if it's due to our network, then we raise a fault ticket and then we roll a truck to fix that problem.
If that retail service provider customer has got a 50 meg product, which is now becoming, I won't say the standard, but more and more people are picking up this product, which has got to be a good thing.
Yep.
But their typical speed drops to, let's say, for argument's sake, 30 meg. Will you go out and rectify a fault because of a fault in that line? Will you go out and rectify that?
Yeah, so what we've introduced recently is, and we're just piloting a lot of these processes at the moment, but they'll soon become a standard way of working, is in the TN network, the moment that the new customer plugs a modem in the other end, we can then do a test which calculates, so we can calculate what the true line speed is, regardless of what service they've bought. So it may be capable of, say, 80 meg, but they've bought a 50. What we then do, we've built the capability that we can monitor degradation of that line speed. And at the moment, we're just working out what the right threshold of degradation is before we react and send a truck, because you can imagine these degradations vary a little bit based on a variety of things. And at the moment,
what are you doing at the moment on that degradation? What's the rule of thumb you use at the moment on that degradation?
At the moment, we're looking at a 20%. So we're looking at when the speed versus the attainable line speed, which is the ping test you referred to, degrades by 20%. Then we are then rolling a truck to investigate to determine what the problem is, provided we can then determine that that's not an in-home wiring issue.
But that may not bear a relationship to the product that the customer has purchased.
Exactly. So yeah, if the line's capable of 80, it degrades by 20%. We'll see that. We'll still react to it, but that may be still above the product that's actually being purchased. And as I said, this is a new capability that we brought to bear at the end of June, and we're just in the piloting phase at the moment with a number of RSPs trying to fine-tune exactly the way this works.
What if it's not a 80 to 60? What if it's a 50 to 30? What would you do then? And that customer is on a 50 meg product, a 50 bundle.
Can you give me that scenario again?
So the example you gave to me was somebody who's in a house that has line capability, theoretical line capability of 80, gets a 20% degradation, takes them down to 60. They're on a 50 meg product, happy days, no problem there. The customer's getting what they've paid for. But what if they're on a 50 meg product and they have the 25% degradation on that line? What does NBN do then?
So the products we offer are an up to speed, but we are, we're very conscious and very focused on delivering a great customer experience. So we know that even though that is a committed peak rate, rather than a minimum rate, we do know that if there is a degradation in that service based on the potential of that line, it will lead to a negative customer experience. So at the moment, we've set that number at 20% degradation. But as I said, we're in the pilot phase. We'll work with RSPs and end users to try and work out what the optimum percentage should be set at so that we can continue to deliver a very good customer experience.
And is this being communicated to the retail service providers, that there is a 20% risk rate on the downside for the standard bundle?
Well, the product we offer is an up-to product.
Yep.
But this new process that I'm referring to has been communicated to at least those RSPs that are involved in the pilot. And we do have the intention to, as we fine-tune this and get our processes industrialised so that we can run this at the scale we need to, that we will roll it out across.
Yeah. You're going to have the benefit of some questioning from the senators, I think. We're just being called to...
We've only got one senator here, if we all go.
Okay.
That's not even a subcommittee, so the hearing is suspended until after the division.
Sorry, guys. Thank you for your answers.
Okay.
of the Kevin Hines Grow charity. It's a disability charity that was without access to internet for a period of 9 months due to loss of internet connection during the transfer period between NBN and their current provider. They had to expend over 100 hours of staff time and lose about $5,000 attempting to rectify the issue. Are you aware of that situation?
Not that specific one.
No, we're not, Senator. Let me see if one of our colleagues is, but I'm not aware of it personally.
Would I?
It's in Doncaster, you say?
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
Can you tell us when the story was, Senator?
The story was published very recently, but I can't see.
Okay.
In the last, I believe it was in the last few days, but I can't see a date on the story. It was specifically caused by a technical issue with the NBN node, and there were significant challenges in contacting the corporation and admittedly the telco, Telstra, in relation to rectifying the issue.
But let me take that on notice. But I'll see if I can come back to you before the end of the hearing, Senator, with any information we have on that matter you raised.
All right, and sticking with the issue of complaints and issues, I note that the TIO report, the telco industry ombudsman report of 2016-17, obviously, as you would know, pointed to 159% increase in complaints compared to the previous year. I wondered whether you might be able to complaints in relation to NBN. Would you be able to give us some updated figures in relation to around complaints?
I'm not sure when the next TIO report is due, Senator, but I'm sure someone will tell me in a minute. But we've got to be careful when we look at things that are called NBN complaints, because they can be a range of issues for RSPs, not necessarily an NBN related issue. In fact, my understanding is about 5% of those issues, I think, is the number related actually to NBN related issues. What I can tell you, rather than the complaints, what I can tell you is that Mr. Ryan on my left here has instigated a phenomenal piece of work this year to ensure that customer experience is significantly lifted, as indeed has our retail partners in conjunction with our teams. I think when you look at the transparency metrics, which is on our website, I think it's called the monthly progress report. In June 18, you'll be able to see the progress that's being made. The next TIO report, I'm not sure when that's out, Senator, but we certainly have seen a big lift in customer experience this year, and a lot of those complaints are not related. The vast majority of those complaints are not NBN related.
But I mean, in this particular case, Mr. Roux, I mean, you've got a situation where a charity that heavily relies on internet connection was, as I said, out of internet access for 9 months. One of your spokespeople in response said that you always work closely with RSPs to ensure that users are migrated as smoothly as possible to the network. But I'm really quite concerned to see a situation where the corporation would have allowed a situation like this to continue for such a long period of time.
Yeah. So two things. Firstly, if I just give you a more fulsome answer as well on the last last question you asked me, as the network, you want to also be careful in looking at percentage complaints, even though I say the vast majority are not ours, because of course our network and our users have massively grown over the last year. The issue that you're raising, I completely understand your concern, Senator, but we need to get to the facts of the case because on many occasions things are more complicated than may be described in whatever you're reading.
That, Mr.
And, sorry, and on top of that, often they are not actually caused by NBN. So let me actually come back either through on notice or through one of my colleagues pass me on some information to your request.
All right, thank you very much. That's it for me.
Thank you, Senator. Could I just go to some questions about the HFC? Thank you.
Yes, of course.
So, could you give me a number of how many thousand homes are currently on DOCSIS 3.1?
Ooh, off the top of my head, I think we have deployed DOCSIS 3.1 to maybe less than 10 nodes, and the average number of houses hanging off a node would be a couple of hundred. So there's the rough maths. And the reason why it's what we've done is we've deployed the capability into the core of the network, and we have piloted it across a number of nodes to make sure it works and test all the processes, and we're just starting to scale that program up now, and we will gradually increase the pace of rolling out DOCSIS 3.1 to nodes across the network.
Okay, so how long is this project of the 10 nodes and 200 at a time for each of the nodes? How long have you been undertaking this process?
The program itself of DOCSIS 3.1 has been going on for quite some time as it's gone through the concept phase to, as you can imagine, we tested in our laboratories, in our network lab. We prove out the stability and reliability of the technology, and then we start to deploy it into the core network, and then we piloted it across a number of nodes, and that's a journey of several I can't tell you off the top of my head, but we're talking 6+ months.
And virtually all on modems. So.
Yeah, and in preparation for that, we've made sure that the vast majority of our HFC modems are 3.1 compatible.
Yeah.
Okay, so if the premises on DOCSIS 3.1 can't access faster speeds, what is the primary benefit of the upgrade?
Of the upgrade? Well, certainly DOCSIS 3.1 technology has the ability to run higher speeds, should we choose to deploy a higher speed HFC product in the future. What it gives us in the short term is two key benefits, and the biggest one being a more efficient way of deploying capacity onto the network instead of having to do more physical node splits. So the spectral efficiency that comes with the new technology enables us to double the capacity on a node, which again is a very efficient, both in terms of cost and effort, to deploy additional capacity. It also has a benefit of the newer technology and is able to deliver improved stability on the line.
So essentially you're saying it improves capacity, is that correct?
It allows us to deploy capacity in a very efficient manner, yes.
And does that mean that there's not enough current capacity on DOCSIS 3.0?
No, not at all. There's plenty of capacity there, but at the moment, if a node goes above a certain level of utilisation, we have to deploy more capacity to that node. If we didn't have DOCSIS 3.1 technology, we would have to schedule a node split, which means we have to build another node, migrate houses off one node onto the other node, and we would have planned all that out to happen well before there was a negative customer experience. With the DOCSIS 3.1 technology, we are able to deploy technology more efficiently, more quickly, and at lower cost compared to if we didn't have it and had to go through the process of splitting nodes.
Right, so the people who are on 3.1 are likely to be able to get a better service than those on 3.0?
No. In fact, the people on a DOCSIS 3.1 probably don't even know they're on it. It does give us a slight improvement in stability. So to that degree, yes, if you're under a 3.1 node, there is that benefit. But by and large, whether a customer is sitting on a 3.1 enabled node or not, they wouldn't be aware.
Is DOCSIS 3.1 more expensive than 3.0?
Tricky question, really, because it's like we've built the whole network today on DOCSIS 3.0. Then we have to go down the process, and every technology is constantly going through an evolutionary path, whether it be fixed wireless going from 4G to 5G or whatever, and GPON and all that. Every technology goes through an evolutionary path, and on the HFC, the next evolutionary path of DOCSIS technology is the 3.1. So naturally, you move to the latest technology, and it's an appropriate time for us to be deploying it because it gives us a cost-effective, time-effective way to deploy capacity in line with the growing demand on the network.
Could you explain the cost effectiveness and the time effectiveness that you just referred to there?
We would have had to have deployed the capacity no matter what, but by having the 3.1 technology, it's more cost efficient because I would have had to have built, or NBN would have had to have built more node splits, which is quite a costly process compared to not having to split that node. Instead, we deploy the 3.1 technology to it, and we make sure that the modems hanging off that are 3.1 enabled, and that gives us the doubling of capacity without having to split the node. And splitting a node means we're out there in the field rolling trucks, hauling cable, plus back inside NBN we're having to migrate customers in terms of the data from one node to another. So it's all quite
in terms of operational costs, 3.0 clearly has costs attached to it. If we just compared the rollout of the technology 3.0 and 3.1, or the actual elements of the rollout, the items, is there a difference in cost between 3.0 and 3.1?
Inevitably there would be. We'd probably have to take that question on notice to get that level of specific granularity to do a logical comparison.
3.1 saves you money in capacity.
Yeah, 3.1 saves us money in capacity deployment compared to if we didn't have it.
Yeah, so if you can give me a comparative cost of, the cost of rolling out 3.0, the cost of rolling out 3.1. You explained the advantage of the shifting to the new technology. I understand that.
Okay.
Is HFC node splitting being captured in the cost per premises of HFC?
It depends. Where we do node splits as part of the build program, it is included in the cost per premise. And excuse me, Senator, if you recall, one of the reasons why we increased the cost per premise in I think it was December was because we included some incremental would be doing on the network. Where we have node splits after we have released an area for sale, then that is part of an ongoing capital expenditure program.
Okay, so if I put it this way...
That is the same as the fixed wireless accounting for cost per premise as well.
Right. So node splitting is currently being captured in the cost per premises?
To be clear, where we do it as part of the build before we make an area ready for sale, it is included. Where an area has been released for sale and customers are on the network, and we then do node splits in that case, it is not included in cost per premise, and I think we've laid that out in our explanation.
In that second instance that you just referred to, is that considered an augmentation cost, or do you have a...
It's part of the capital expenditure on HFC. I wouldn't call augmentation. I think we call it capacity capacity management CapEx, I think is what we call it. Or capacity CapEx.
I understand that if HFC cable's bent beyond a particular angle, it starts to compromise the signal, and in doing so, that can cause a reduction in speed and dropouts. Can you explain the engineering around why this occurs?
So the quality of service that you receive at the end of your HFC cable is dependent on two major things. One, the strength of the signal that gets all the way from the exchange all the way to your house, and the amount of noise that may be existing on your line. And the difference between the two, or the signal to noise ratio, in large cases, then dictates the quality of service you're getting, either in terms of the speed or the stability of that line. So let me just then bring it back to bent cable. If you bend that cable so hard, the casing on the outside splits, then that allows other RF that may be existing in that area to infiltrate into the cable. So that could be anything from somebody's electric roller door to anything that may exist. Noise getting into the cable through a cracking of the casing increases the noise level. Similarly, if you bend that radius so hard, it will degrade the signal as it seeks to traverse around that bend. So you're lowering the signal level. So that both those two things can play out. And you're absolutely right. There is good standard practice to bend radiuses that we seek to achieve in the deployment of that HFC cable.
So which frequencies, Mr. Ryan, are most impacted by the bending?
In terms of, well, I probably have to take that one on notice, but we have a very small, our range of the spectrum that we have in the HFC, we can typically bend these cables on anything around about an 18-inch circle radius. That's probably the most accurate thing we can say. But I can take a notice to go away and come back to you with a spectrum range that's most impacted by bending, but then it's probably then a question of, it'll be a ratio of the amount of bend versus the frequency as to the degradation that would occur.
Okay. Is it true that the Telstra HFC network, which NBN acquired, has a problem in some areas with HFC bend ratios?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Are you sure about that, Mr. Ryan?
Well, it's never been raised with me if it does exist. What we do have, which I'm really excited about, we have tools in our operations area that is able to analyse the signal that's occurring once we put a modem at the other end. We're able to interrogate those signals to determine any levels of degradation, either in terms of the signal strength or the noise level, and the tools allow us to pinpoint problems very accurately. So that could be bend radiuses, it could be breaking in the outer casing, it could be taps in the network where the seal on the tap is degraded over time and allowed moisture to ingress, all these things which degrade the end user service. The tools that we have now are able to very accurately pinpoint those, and we're able to raise trouble tickets and go out and fix. But specifically to your question, no, I am not aware of any specific parts of the Telstra network that have bend radius issues.
Several years ago, it was announced that NBN Co had entered into a $1.6 billion contract with Telstra for the design and management of the HFC network. At the time, NBN was due to serve 4 million premises with a HFC, but now it's due to serve under 3 million homes with HFC. Has the value of the $1.6 billion Telstra contract gone up or down?
Well, I'm loath to talk too much about the commercials with Telstra, Senator, but it was for an area. So when you talk about HFC, it was, and sometimes we actually confuse ourselves on this too, it's the HFC area. and that actually meant all technologies built into that area. So where HFC has gone down, obviously another technology would have gone up. So the answer to your question is that area is part of that contractual arrangements, and you've got to look at build within a whole area, not just a technology.
Yep, we are. Sorry, I have to attend a division. I think Senator Mr Jones is going to take over now. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
That's all right.
Over to you, Mr Jones.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, I missed some of this, and if you've already answered a question that I'm going to ask, just in your normal candid way, just say move on, will you? The DOCSIS rollout, which I think you went large on last week. Anyway.
We've just dealt with that, I think. I think we've just dealt with that.
I just wanted to confirm, if I could, whether every HFC premise is going to be receiving or is going to be activated with the DOCSIS the new DOCSIS 3.1 format.
So, we didn't quite cover that. So, that's true. Virtually every modem in the network, in the HFC network, is 3.1 enabled. In other words, it can operate in either 3.0 or 3.1. Virtually every modem, and those that aren't, we will gradually swap them out for a 3. To have the capability to be 3.1 enabled. The way we're deploying DOCSIS 3.1 is it's enabled in the core part of the network, and then we will deploy it on a node-by-node basis, focusing on the nodes in the network that have high utilisation, because the great thing about the DOCSIS 3.1 technology is it allows us to deploy capacity into the network in a very cost-efficient manner, and therefore we're targeting that technology initially at nodes that have got a high utilisation, so that we can get capacity out there in a very cost-efficient manner.
Thank you. Thanks. Has the NBN issued Telstra with any non-compliance warnings under the contract that you have with them?
Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge, no.
Would you be able to...
But maybe for us to be specifically correct, maybe we can just... We'll ask the teams to come back.
We meet with them obviously very regularly and discuss as you'd expect, the whole programme. But let us take that. Let's take that on notice, Mr. Jones.
Plus, we have multiple contracts with them doing various things. So.
Yeah, understood. If you could get back to us on that, it'd be good.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Now, the NBN's indicated the reason that the HFC halt, one of the reasons for the HFC halt was the interference at the upper ends of the upstream channel. I think we are talking about the 40 to 60 megahertz, is that correct? And again, if you've covered that previously, just tell me, was it the 40 to 60 megahertz?
Well, we haven't covered the pause. We haven't covered the pause in the HFC, no.
So the reason for that interference at the upper end of the spectrum, the 40 to 60 megahertz, is that correct?
Sorry, can you ask that one more time?
I just want to confirm that the reason for the halt was the additive interference at the upper end of the upstream channel, and I understand that's in the 40 to 60 megahertz range.
No, I think there were multiple and a range of issues that contributed to the decision to halt the sale of the HFC product.
Okay, but that is not one of them?
The reason the HFC product, when we launched it, was the rate of take-up of the HFC product itself was much quicker than we'd seen on many other of our technologies. We knew that for us, we had a lot of confidence in the network, but we wouldn't be able to see the true performance of the network until we started to deploy NBN modems into the network, because that gave us the visibility all the way to the premise of the quality of the network. As we started to see the visibility of the quality of the network and across a broad number of geographic areas, we were able to respond to be able to repair any fixes that may have existed in the network. And the reason why we paused, because eventually the rate at which we were releasing footprint and then the rate at which we were getting on that, and therefore the rate of the deployment of the modems and visibility, then our ability to then respond to any problems that existed in the network, one of which was everything from the physical quality to the network around the signal strength and the noise. We just hit a tipping point where it made sense to us to pause.
On the cost of the pause, can you advise us what the cost impact of the HFC halt was? This is probably a question to you, Mr. Roux, from November last year. Disaggregated costs from November last year.
So again, Senator, you're not a senator. I'm sorry, Mr. Jones. Apologies. I get used to that. I'm really sorry. I've done it before.
You've just offended two houses of Parliament there, Mr. Roux.
I was saying to Senator O'Neill earlier that our corporate plan is due to be released in a couple of weeks, and we will be discussing as part of that many things. And I think if you could please be patient for a couple of weeks, and I can take you through that once our plan is actually released. I can give you a fulsome answer.
So presumably this is going to feature in the new plan then?
There are many things that feature in the new plan, Senator. So obviously from our operational metrics through to financial metrics through to the usual discussions we have on things like customer experiences in the plan. So we'll be able to, once that corporate plan is through our board and we get approval to release it, we will be doing so.
Okay. Away from those matters, back to some engineering matters. What's the typical size of the conduit size for an HFC lead-in, Mr. Ryan?
The typical diameter of a lead-in conduit, I'd probably have to take that on notice. I think it's a 50, but I'd take that on notice.
Okay.
That's if it's an underground, obviously, versus an aerial.
Okay, and for HFC premises that don't have an existing lead-in, does the NBN try and run the coax through the existing conduit, or is there another mechanism?
If a house doesn't have a lead-in, then we have to build a conduit. Unless there's an existing unused conduit, but that's pretty rare.
With the diameter, that'd take the diameter size.
Yeah, exactly. So we generally have to trench in, build a conduit, and haul the coax cable through it.
Do you
I think it's a 50, but we'll get that checked.
Yeah. Do you have any sense of what proportion of the premises you're rolling out in the HFC footprint require a new conduit line in? A new conduit, sorry, to be built before you can get a line in?
How new build, I don't know.
Yeah, no, we do have that information, but just not straight to hand. So if we
Sure, I appreciate that. If you could let us know when it comes to hand, that would be
Again,
good.
we may get an answer in the next 20 minutes, Mr. Jones, in which case we'll tell you.
Excellent. That would be great. I think I'm done with this line of questioning. Do you guys have others that...
I don't.
Thank you. I have, just to cover off fixed wireless, one question about fixed wireless. Do you have the data on the number of fixed wireless towers that have been placed in national parks around the country with a state-by-state breakdown? Are you able to get that data?
We would have.
We would have, but not at hand.
I'm sure we have that. We will get that for you. We'll take that on notice.
Thank you very much. I'd appreciate that. Can I turn to FTTC?
Yes, of course.
I have constituents who've asked about this, and I've been advised that there is no technology choice option so far created for FTTC. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
Why is that?
Stretching my memory. I think we're working on it. And we will be having one. It's just a matter of time. But
It's not an engineering issue, though, is it?
No.
no, it becomes a new product. That's why. So we will be doing that. It's just the timing I don't have to mind.
Do you have any framework to date as to the sorts of costs that will be involved from NBN's perspective in that technology choice option?
For FTTC?
For FTTC.
Well, it will depend upon the circumstances. So every premise, every request could be different. It would depend upon the actual cost.
Yeah. So for example, in an FTTN area, we have to bring fibre outside the house to be able to deploy FTTC. So therefore, it depends on the distance of that house back to the nearest point of NBN fibre, which is typically back at the node. So that's hence why that distance will cause the cost to vary.
I think. Sorry.
No,
it's
you
also,
go on.
It's also FTTC is trying to answer your question as to why we don't have that product yet. It's also very new. It's a very new technology, and we're still working through all the costings that will be involved in that sort of work if we were to have a technology choice program. When we're more certain, we absolutely will launch the product.
So is there an anticipated time frame for when customers will be able to consider a technology choice option?
Yeah, I don't think we've worked that out yet. So at the moment, I would say no, but it is something that we will be doing.
Yeah, we are waiting for we are also in the technology as we go through these early phases.
I understand that NBN's been having some challenges remediating pits as part of the FTTC deployment. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say we're having problems. I think the issue is that we're remediating more than we had expected.
By what factor? How many more?
I don't have that. It was just more than what we had anticipated when we put together the schedule, and that's just causing us problems more around productivity of resources in terms of kilometres of FTTC deployed, because we're having to upgrade or replace more pits than we had expected.
Are you able to identify how many pits or what percentage of pits have required remediation specifically for FTTC in the areas where that's happening?
We would be able to provide that, yes. Yeah.
And when you say it was more than you anticipated...
And so this is the percentage, just so I get this right, it's not the percentage of all the pits, it's just the percentage of pits that we deploy a DPU into, how many of those pits require an upgrade. That's right?
Yeah, yes. Well, you talked about it was a level higher than anticipated, so
Yeah.
it would be good to understand what your expectations were as well, if there's data
Sure.
to show this was our expectation, this was the reality.
Yep.
And what are the reasons why, what's the technical side for why they need remediation? What is it you are remediating?
A couple of things. One, if the pit is made out of asbestos and we have to do any work to the pit, then we have to replace the pit. Secondly, and probably most importantly, it's not until we get into the field that we often understand, because the distance between the DPU and the house, we limit it to about 100 metres. And therefore, until we get out into the field, into the specific houses, and we understand exactly which pit is feeding what house, and the distance from that pit, copper length, to that house, then determines how many DPUs we can put inside that pit. And if the number of DPUs is more than the pit has capacity physically to handle, then we have to increase the size of that pit, and therefore we have to upgrade that pit. And that's typically what determines it, and that's why you can determine so much from a desktop design versus when we get into the field and actually determine which pits need to be upgraded. Also, you then get to understand what other infrastructure exists in the pit that is sharing that space, and therefore whether there's enough physical space to put more DPUs in there.
So what would the average cost be to remediate the pits where it's required?
We would have to take that question on notice. And again, it very much depends on whether you're upgrading from an A to a B to a C, and which different types of pits and the sizes you're upgrading from and to.
Thank you. It would be good to get some figures on that. Under the original contracts, Telstra was required to ensure that pits were remediated and fit for purpose. And Telstra bore those costs. Since the change of government, who has that obligation now, Telstra or NBN?
NBN does. But there was an adjustment in the contract to make sure that there was no financial disadvantage or no advantage to Telstra or disadvantage to either party.
And does that apply to remediation of just FTTC pits or all Telstra pits for the rollout?
All Telstra pits.
Okay.
How does that adjustment work if you're saying that you now bear responsibility for those pits and the cost of the remediation? How does that adjustment work?
It was a commercial arrangement determined in 2014. That really is a confidential agreement between Telstra and NBN as to the mechanics of it. But the purpose of the contract and the design of the contract was that there was no gain, no loss through the new contractual arrangements with Telstra from the original ones back in 2011.
So does that effectively mean that Telstra picks up the cost?
What it means is that the arrangements that were entered into with Telstra back in 2011 led to certain payments, certain commercial arrangements between NBN and Telstra, and those arrangements financially didn't change with the new agreement in 2014.
I'm not sure I understand, to be honest. I just want to, please excuse my...
What I can try and assure you is that the arrangements that were entered into with Telstra, with us taking over the accountability for remediation, did not provide a benefit or a loss to either party.
All right.
The actual commercial construct, I'm sorry, I can't...
I understand, I understand you saying that, but let me put it in simple terms. Previously, Telstra was responsible, if a pit needed remediation, Telstra picked up the cost. You're saying that as a result of contract changes, NBN now picks up the cost, but you have an arrangement with Telstra where you're at no disadvantage and they're at no disadvantage, and which would also mean they have no advantage, you have no advantage. So it's a neutral arrangement. But somebody's got to pay for the cost of remediating the pit. Now, if that used to be a cost that Telstra picked up, but it's now a cost you pick up, who's paying?
We are paying for the remediation work that is done, but the arrangements that were entered into meant that and this was made clear, by the way, as part of the, I think it was December 2014, the new arrangements were entered into. The effect of the commercial construct meant that there was no difference in payments to Telstra over time.
So, I mean, without wanting to get into the specifics of your commercial arrangements, does that effectively mean that you subtract the cost of your remediation of these pits to any other payments you make to Telstra?
Again, without getting into the exact detail how it works, that's a simple way of saying it. That's correct. So, in other words, where we have to pay for remediation, Telstra doesn't. There's a credit against, if you like, against what we would have paid to Telstra. But I'm sorry, I can't get into the specific.
I understand. Just a couple of more questions from me, Chair, if that's all right. Thank you. If we can come to you, sorry, you're done.
Thank you.
If I can just come to the Standard & Poor's NBN report, has this been referred to while we were absent?
No, it was not.
Right. Standard & Poor's have issued what can be described as a scathing report about the economics of the multi-technology mix. The report states that a write-down on the retrograde, on what I regard as a retrograde multi-technology mix is inevitable, in their words. Do you agree with the S&P assessment?
I thought the S&P report was full of opinions, actually. But if I can address right down, and maybe I should address that from both the way that we as a company think of it and as I understand government accounting works. So, and you have to actually look at them in two parts. So when we look at our what I call carrying value, or what the value of our assets should be in NBN's books, the principal assets we have are obviously the network we are building and the IT backbone that supports that and also supports business services. And that is appropriately carried in our accounts at cost less depreciation. And when we look at the carrying value of that, we look at the way under accounting standards, and that looks at, for example, what would it cost you to replace those assets, allowing for time. In other words, what I would call depreciation. The other thing you look at is the economics of the business. So you look at the long-term business model that in part we will be releasing in a couple of weeks, but the economics of the business is strong, and the result of that means that we are comfortable with the accounting carrying value of the network assets and the IT assets, in fact all our assets, the net assets in our books. That's how we look at it. As I understand what the government is, so if I take the June 17 financial statements, and I have to talk to them rather than 18, but the June 17 financial statements, I think, had our assets carried at around, net assets at around 15 billion in our books. What the government does is it takes it looks at that and it accounts for that in their books, the equity in their books at that 15 billion, plus a slight change between government accounting and corporate accounting, which meant they increased that by about another billion. So when you look at from government accounting, what they do is they account for depending on the net assets that we have in our books. Does that make sense? Then when we look at our net assets in our books, we are comfortable with the carrying value of our assets because of the economic model of our business. So there is no reason that we can say at all for us, because of the strength of our business model, for us not to carry our assets other than at cost less depreciation in our books.
So is it fair for me to summarise?
But that's a very long way of saying no. But I think it's worthy of putting on the record how
you come to it. I appreciate, and I do appreciate that. So are you still confident that NBN will reach the average revenue per user of $52 by 2021?
Well, again, let us, I'm really sorry to be boring, but let us, if you could hold that question, we will be releasing our corporate plan at hopefully the end of this month.
Yep.
And at that point in time, I'm happy to answer that question.
All right, I've got a few more questions here that you may give a similar answer to, but I'll try my luck. Are you confident that if NBN did reach that ARPU target, that its market share would not drop below 74%?
Once again, I am going to give you the same answer,
Yep.
but I'll expand on that answer by saying that what we're seeing today in areas that are past what we call disconnection date, or past the 18 months after ready for service, we are seeing a average take-up of around that number, 73, 74, 75%. And in fact, we see post-disconnection, people continue to go onto our network. So the forecasts of take-up that we've had for many years, we're actually seeing that today for real live areas that are post-disconnection. In terms of the longer-term plan, it's the same answer, I'm sorry.
All right. And the Telstra CEO has said that Telstra expects 1 million users to switch from NBN and fixed line to wireless 5G. Do you agree with this statement? Does this suggest that NBN market share may well drop to the mid-60s?
Well, I mean, that's the sort of statement that you'd expect the CEO of Telstra to say, is the first thing I'd say.
Is that the sort of statement I'd expect you to say?
What we're seeing today is good levels of take-up, as I've just described, and continuing to grow. We're also seeing very significant growth of data on the network. And we talked earlier about shared networks and the challenges there are with concurrency and take-up and data consumption, which would certainly be a challenge to any mobile network. As we look forward in the future, I think the whole issue around 5G is still yet to be commercialised. There are still many years to play out in this. As we sit here today, we're seeing that 75% take-up rate.
Do you necessarily disagree with the statement?
I think that it's far too early to be making any statements, and it's far too early which is why I said the Standard & Poor's report had a lot of opinions in it.
So you're not saying that the Telstra CEO is necessarily wrong, merely you believe he's being a bit presumptive?
I think it's the sort of statement that you'd expect him to make.
Right. If 1 million consumers were to switch, what impact would that have on the NBN business case?
Well, I don't really want to get into hypotheticals around what will be switches, but clearly, and the question. So in part, the answer to that is obviously if you've got less users, you've got less revenue. I mean, that's obvious. But the question is also for how long, and as data consumption continues to grow, and as applications continue to grow, I've got absolutely no doubt that our network is built for the future, and the economic model absolutely stands up.
All right. Well, that's me done. And I'm sure the Chair will thank you both, but I'd like to, on my own behalf, and thank you both for the patience you've both shown tonight.
No, that's okay. Chair, can I just... One of my colleagues is telling me I wasn't clear. I thought I was, but they tell me what...
You can repeat an answer, that's no problem.
You could pass to Senator O'Neill. She asked about cost per premise. Was node splits included in the cost per premise? And I thought I was clear in it, but to be absolutely clear, it is included in cost per premise until the end of coexistence. So just be very clear. If I could have that on hand, sir, please, if you could pass on to Senator O'Neill.
That will be included. Thank you both very much for persisting with our coming and going and for appearing at what's probably quite an awkward time of day. Now, there were quite a few questions on notice. The Hansard transcript will be available in 24 hours, and the committee hopes and expects that your answers will be with us by August the 31st. Is that okay?
August the 31st?
The answers to questions on notice.
That sounds a very shortened timeline.
Okay, well,
because often there were a lot of questions that required us to get significant amount of detail. So I think to manage your expectations, I think we'll struggle to get everything back by that date. But
we might need to manage yours a little bit, Mr. Rue. It's a fortnight, and we have got a report that we are submitting with parliamentary deadlines. So if we can leave it, you'll do your best to get the answers to us.
Of course we'll do our best.
Yes.
Of course we'll do it. We always do. And we answer hundreds and hundreds of questions every year on notice. So of course we'll do our best.
That suggests you got all the answers to hand. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. And the public hearing is now closed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, mate.
Thank you.